Welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast, where we want you to thrive in the ministry God has called you to. We truly believe that God's placement has purpose, and we're here for you with encouragement and tools for the journey.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Olson. Thanks for joining us today. We have a great episode in store for you. We really try hard to provide practical resources and just helpful things. We want to really encourage you on your journey in ministry and in life. And so today I'm excited to welcome a special guest who I just met in the last year, really in 2019. And his organization and himself has been such a blessing to the ministry of Overflow Worship. And so I just said, hey, will you come on the podcast? And he was gracious to accept. So I just want to give a warm welcome to Wisdom Moon.
Thank you.
Thanks for being on the
I
podcast.
hope I don't let your listeners down.
No, you won't at all. I was thinking back to when you invited me to be on your podcast,
Yeah.
and I was so embarrassed because you asked me how weird I was, and I didn't know what to say. Because you said on a scale of 1 to 10, how weird are you? And I think I said like 7, which is funny because I'm not that weird. And so then I couldn't think of anything that I
Yeah.
do that's weird, and I was so embarrassed. So, hopefully, I'm a better host than I was a guest. I don't know. I promise not to do anything weird to you, Wisdom, here on the podcast.
I thought you did great. It was
Oh,
really
good. Well, thank you for being here. Let's just kick it off. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and where God has you today?
Yeah, so my name is Wisdom, and I live in Kansas City on the Kansas side. There's 2 Kansas cities. There's Kansas City, Kansas, and Missouri, so it's really confusing. I don't know why they do that.
Yeah.
I was actually born in South Korea, in Seoul, and my family migrated or immigrated to California when I was 9. Um, so I really grew up in the American culture and actually Silicon Valley, and grew up in ministry and church. And I actually resisted um, ministry, and I didn't want to be a part of church ministry. But God gently pulled me in, and so I've done worship ministry, youth ministry, children's ministry, and I've worked in inner cities and the suburbs, and got to do a lot of nonprofit work as well. So yeah, it's been a fun journey. I also worked in the Christian music industry, and now I have my own marketing agency where we help churches and ministries like yours, as well as
Mhm.
artists with marketing and branding.
Yeah. Yes. And it's just amazing. It was so eye-opening for me when we first started working with you back in like February, whatever it
Yeah,
was. It was just like so revelational and so helpful for us to kind of
mm,
identify, who we are as an organization and how to uh, just really capitalize on that as we move forward and being confident in, who
yeah,
God has made this organization to be. So, as you talked about all the different ministry experience that you've had, it's so interesting to me. It's just been a common theme in the last few months as I've talked with different people about how God is writing such a unique story for everybody, and he's putting these pieces together. And you probably, didn't think at the time that any of those pieces in youth and children and nonprofit and that any of them were connected. But how cool
yeah,
that you've had that experience and now kind of breathe life into so many different areas of ministry and industry because of that.
mm,
So I think that's so fascinating and beautiful.
yeah.
So, as you kind of think back over the last several years, why don't you, tell us a little bit of your story and what God's been doing in your heart and your life over the last few years as he's kind of walked you through
Yeah.
this story of ministry and, where you are today.
Yeah, I tell people that I'm just a shy Korean kid that God decided to use, one day for
Mm,
some reason. And it's kind of the story of like the boy with, loaves and fish that
Yeah.
Jesus was like, "Hey, I'll take that and multiply it."
Mm,
And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know how God uses me. Like,
mm,
to this day, I'm just like really blown away, by His mercy and
mm.
grace. So, even as I look back at like how I even got involved in Christian music industry, it's crazy because I actually started out with a podcast like 13, 14 years ago.
Wow.
And my wife and I did this podcast called All About Worship, and it was for worship leaders. And it was one of the first podcasts, like just in existence
Mhm.
in all
Wow.
categories. So we got a lot of engagement, and we like connected with worship leaders through MySpace back in the day.
Wow. MySpace.
Yeah. And one of the first company that reached out to us for like advertising was Planning Center because they were just launching as
Wow.
well.
Huh.
So
Wow.
I like literally had to learn everything, just by, trial and error. I didn't know how to like charge people or invoice people. I didn't know how to build a website
Yeah. Yes.
or podcast, So I was just like trying to figure everything out. And from developing and like growing All About Worship is how I got connected with the Christian music industry and the different labels and artists. And so that's actually how like I went into marketing and
Okay.
to doing marketing in the Christian music industry and working with different artists. So yeah, it's been just looking back, I'm just like, I don't know how all this happened, but it was God ordering, my
Yeah.
steps and me just saying yes, every time that I felt like God was, leading me in a direction. So yeah, I think even with this marketing agency now, I've been doing this for a year and a half.
Mm,
I was working at Integrity Music in Nashville at the time, and I was doing marketing. And I was driving into the office one morning, and just a normal day, just like getting annoyed at the traffic, the
yeah.
Nashville traffic.
Oh,
and
Nashville traffic.
yeah. And I'm just driving, and I think at most of the time I'm listening to something like a
Mhm.
podcast or music. I think that morning I just decided to, just be still and just, drive and try to listen, to the Holy Spirit. And as I was driving, I was like having this sense that maybe God was telling me that there's a new season coming,
Mm,
and to be ready for it.
wow.
And I didn't know what that meant. And I basically texted my wife as soon as I got to the office, and I was like, I think God's telling me there's a transition coming.
Mm,
But at that time, we were just like totally happy where we were at, and I was, happy in my role.
yeah.
And we had just built a house like 2 years
Wow.
prior, so we
Wow.
didn't expect to move anywhere. And when I heard that, I didn't try to make anything happen,
Yeah.
but I had my antenna up going,
Mm,
okay, let's be more sensitive and see, what doors God opens and what conversations happen, and then it was about 2 months later where my wife and I both one day just felt like we were supposed to transition out of Nashville and Ontario music. And really, it was out of obedience that I started this marketing agency
mm.
with like nothing. Like, I literally had nothing. And I've never said this publicly, but I literally went on Fiverr and paid somebody $20 to design my logo.
Oh, wow.
So like I literally had like nothing in place.
Mm,
I didn't have like, any investment or anything into it. I created a logo, and then built a website, like a
mm,
simple website,
yeah.
and then said, "All right, God, this is super scary, but let's see what you do."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's just amazing. It's just like look and look what God has done. And it started with those faithful yeses, and
Mhm.
it's it's like that's our job here on this earth is to be sensitive to listen
Yeah.
and then act in obedience when he asks us to take those steps. And it's not always easy. Most of the
Mhm.
time it's not. Most of the time we
Yeah.
find ourselves saying like, this is the hardest thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
And this probably is one of the hardest things that, you and your family have
Yeah.
had to leap into in faith. And I can certainly empathize with that. 2019 was like one big leap for us. It was just
Yeah.
one after the other after the other. But it's so evident that, you know, God has been like orchestrating those steps for us. And it sounds like you are seeing that too, you know, that just
Yeah.
God is like, I got this, I got this. And I think that's just, it's such a beautiful thing. So it's encouraging, I think, for other people to hear that, you know, there are other people out there taking those steps. And you know, it's like we can empathize. That's what the church body is, right? We can like encourage each other with our stories of our lives and
Yeah.
the things that God is doing in our hearts. You know, when we were chatting just before this, you talked about the word obedience, and it's just so evident that that's what this last year and a half really has looked like for you guys.
Yeah.
And so, you know, just tell our listeners a little bit about more about that. Like, what is God teaching you right now or in the last season about obedience? How has that looked in your life?
Yeah. To me, obedience has always been like something that my mom actually like hammered into my mind. Like
Yeah.
she would always like quote the verse, obedience is better than sacrifice. And so I always felt this like pressure to, like it almost could turn into like legalism, if
Yeah.
you're not careful.
Yeah.
And I've like been a part of ministries where it was legalistic and there were more religious expectations put on you
Mm-hmm.
than like really you wanting to go deeper with God because you love, his presence and you want to be in his presence and with his people. But it was
Yeah.
more um religious expectations of like you have to be at church every Sunday and
Mm.
things like that.
Yeah.
It kind of sucks the joy out of
Yeah.
it. So like I've really been learning a lot of about obedience and mostly through just firsthand experience.
Yeah.
Even actually moving to Nashville, I was a part-time worship leader at a smaller church of about like 300 people here in Kansas City, actually. And I was growing all about worship, and I had another thing called Kingdom Songs for worship songwriters. And we actually felt like we were supposed to move to Nashville. I had actually felt it like 2 years prior, but my wife at that time wasn't open to it, and I actually dropped it. And I said, God, if this is you, then like I know we're gonna be in agreement. So
Yeah.
I just prayed and waited for that time. And one random day, my wife came home from like meeting or hanging out with some friends, and she was like, I think we're supposed to move to Nashville. I was like,
Whoa.
yeah, I've been feeling that for a couple of years.
Wow.
So yeah, and the church we were at, that was like the best church ministry experience I've had in my whole
Mm.
life. Like where I was really in sync with my pastor, and we had a great relationship. We loved the church and the people and the team I was leading. So it was really hard to
Mm.
step down from it, but I talked to my pastor about it, and he actually really encouraged me to step into that and obey, and so we did that. And then there was an amazing several years in Nashville where God just opened a lot of great doors. I got to work with Lauren Daigle before she became who she is now. Like she was in a development stage
Yeah.
at that time when I was at her label, and then working with Integrity Music, and even like leaving Integrity when it was just like out of the blue when we felt
Hmm.
like we were supposed to. It literally happened in 1 week where my wife and I like sat and went, I think we're supposed to maybe do this, move to
Mhm.
Kansas City. And going, okay, let's start praying and start asking God to confirm it.
Yeah.
And so we like started talking to our kids about it to see are they even open to it. And
Mhm.
then slowly God gave us like little signs here and there. It was like Easter eggs, and like
Yeah. Yes.
in the story. And so like I think 3 or 4 days later, we decided to put our house on the market because we figured it would take at least like 3 weeks before we even get an offer. And
Yeah.
so we had our realtor come. and a photographer come and take pictures. And so it was like a Wednesday. We had the realtor come. Saturday, our house got listed in the afternoon, and we were like, "All right, well, we'll see what happens tomorrow when we have like open house."
Yeah.
Within an hour, we got a text from our realtor going, "You have an offer,
Like they
a
hadn't even
full
seen it
price
yet.
offer."
Whoa.
Yeah, we
Wow.
were like, "Nobody's even come to see our house yet."
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So like we got a full price offer, and they wanted to pay the closing costs, and like they really wanted our house, even though we
Mm.
had a house right next to us that was sitting there for like 7 months
Wow.
trying to sell. And like there were other houses being built in our community. So we were like, all right, this never happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wasn't even ready to go, put in my resignation. Like we
And
were
now we have
expecting,
no house.
yeah, like
Yeah.
we were like, all right, it's gonna take several weeks for anything
Mm.
to really, happen. So it was a total shock. So
Wow.
within a week of us having that initial conversation,
Mm.
basically like all this happened, and the next day I had to go in and say to the head of Integrity Music, "Hey, so
Yeah.
this is happening." And thankfully, like he was really, sensitive to like God's voice as well.
Mm.
And he was like, "You know what? I would try to convince you to stay, but it's obvious this is God, and
Mhm.
I'm not going to fight God on this."
Yeah. Wow.
So he blessed me and
Hmm.
released me from that role, and we had a great transition time.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, it takes sometimes like it's a practice of obedience where maybe
Yeah.
we obey in the little things, and then God says, all right, take the next leap, and then the next
Yeah.
leap.
Yes.
And what's funny is the person that bought our house actually, her name actually sound I won't say her real name, but her name actually reminded us of Faith Step.
Hmm.
And we had actually been talking about like that was how that's a big faith step for us.
Yeah.
you know
Wow. That's really cool. Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
And so
Well, yeah.
yeah, just to see all those things happen. And sometimes when we don't obey, like God still will gently guide us,
Hmm.
to the best thing that he has for us. And he does it out of love. It's
Yeah.
not like out of this obligation where he like takes out his rod.
Yes. Yes.
But it's out of just him wanting the best for us and wanting us to help us grow and help us get into the calling that he has for us,
Hmm.
and the destiny that he has for us.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's so gracious in the process.
Hmm.
It's not like like you said, when I think of obedience, sometimes it just sounds negative, or it can, just because of, the way
Hmm.
our brains are wired. It's like a forced submission, like
Yeah.
you will obey. And, it's not, sometimes he does, guide us in ways, or help us through. There's difficult times is what I'm trying to say. There's hard
Hmm.
times even in obedience, but
Yeah.
he's so gracious to guide us through those. And then there's stories like yours where you saw such specific confirmations, and
Mm.
that's such a beautiful thing. And he does that. He's so gracious in that, to like, it's like, for me, every time we would take a step, it was almost like I had to look behind me, like a kid does at their father, like, are you sure? Like, am I doing this right? And then it's like those little reminders, those little things, like you said, the purchaser's name, or just, he doesn't have to do
Yeah.
that, but
Yeah.
he does. And I just think that is, it's just such a beautiful testimony to who God is, and that he is faithful. And I think for a lot of people in ministry, a lot of our listeners, a lot of the people that I work with, sometimes it's nice to just know, like I said before, that someone else is in it too. Just hear someone
Hmm.
else's story, and like, hey, they're trying to be faithful with what God set before them. And it encourages us and kind of bolsters us up to maybe take that take that leap as well. And, obviously ministry is wonderful, but it can also be really hard.
Hmm.
And so many different challenges. And, especially in, there are seasons too, like we won't release this podcast till after Christmas, but it's the Christmas season right now. And so
Yeah.
just, yeah, it's encouraging for our listeners to hear how your active obedience has just brought you to where you are today. And so, you know, where you are today, obviously, with your marketing firm, practically, you work with a lot of ministries. And it's cool to see how, like, those acts of obedience that you and your family have made have now put you in a position to, like, bless. You know what I mean? You're just
Mm.
blessing so many people with the the experience and the things that God has put in your path and put inside of you. And so I would love it if you would share with our listeners just a little bit about what you do with churches and nonprofits and organizations. Maybe it's a personal story or experience of a really cool, encouraging organization that you've worked with, just so our listeners can get a little bit of an idea of what that looks like for you.
Yeah. And, when I started, I really didn't know what to expect and who we were going to be working with. It was just kind of like, all right, let me do a social media post and see what happens,
Yeah.
And then people started coming to us, and it's been like that since day one, where people are reaching out to us, and we actually like try to have salespeople and like try to run ads. But the most fruitful thing has been like word of mouth, and like people
Yes.
finding us
Hmm.
through other people, through even Google. We get a lot of inquiries. So we've been able to work with a lot of different industries. It's been really fun. Like we've done a whole branding thing with a travel agency, which
Hmm.
I would have never thought I would work with a
Wow.
travel
Yeah.
agency. We do marketing for a drum company. We work with a lot of artists. I think this year alone, we've helped over 40 artists with
Hmm.
their marketing,
Wow.
and churches as well. And one really fun one that I get to work with even now is there's a church plant, a Calvary Chapel church plant that reached out, and they hadn't even done like their grand opening service. And
Okay.
so they reached out and said, hey, we want to do some marketing. And so after our conversation, I told them, I think what would be really helpful was to do a brand strategy session. And so we did that, and we did it over Zoom actually, because they're in a totally different state, and,
Hmm.
and they didn't have like a budget to fly me out. So
Yeah.
we did it over like a course of 3 days, and we really like try to hash out like who are you, and who are you trying
Mm.
to reach, who's your audience, the people in your community that really need you, and that you can
Mhm.
reach. And so we identify those people and identify the messaging around like how do you want to communicate, what you're about, why you exist, and what people can expect from you. So we really honed in on that messaging, and then we helped them really even edit some of their content on their website and change their navigation on their website to make it really friendly for people visiting for the first time.
Mhm.
Because I think pastors and leaders can easily get a little bit too complicated with their website,
Yeah.
where for them it looks great, and the content might be great, but if you look at it from an outside perspective, for a brand new visitor looking for a church, it might be
Mhm.
a little overwhelming or
Sure.
unclear. So if you aren't clear and you can't clearly communicate what you do as a church and how they can connect with you, then you'll lose those people.
Mhm.
um, so really trying to make that clear. And then we've been also running ads for them on Facebook and Instagram, and actually get emails from the pastor going like, hey, we've been seeing great response from people seeing
Hmm.
our ads and visiting our church, like let's
Yeah.
keep it going, let's add more to the budget. And
Hmm.
so that's been really cool to see. And really like what I do, we're set up as a business, like a corporation, but
Hmm.
what I do, like I see it as a ministry,
Yeah.
and I get to be a part of like really amplifying, other people's ministries and messages and music, to reflect back on like how many lives that we've been a part of,
Yeah.
impacting. It's really awesome and humbling to see.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. And it it made me think while you were talking about just kind of the vast uh, different categories of organizations and people, and then travel agencies to churches to you know
Yeah.
many different businesses. It's like like you said, this is your ministry, and even if it's not a church or a Christian organization, those people, whether it's the people that are you know receiving the marketing material or it's the people that you're working with, they're getting to rub shoulders with you and your organization, and you love the Lord. And so it's like they're
Mm.
whether whether it's an evangelistic conversation or not, it's like they're getting to be exposed to light. And
Yeah. Oh man, actually, that reminds me of a really awesome story. So one of our clients, the founder is actually not a Christian, and we've been doing like a publicity campaign for them. And the founder actually did an interview with a Christian media outlet, and we heard back from that media outlet that at the end of the interview, the founder actually said, "So, like, what does it mean to be born again?" And I
wow.
was like, "Oh,
Wow.
man, that kind of stuff just makes it so worth it,
Oh, wow.
and we always strive to serve people, and
Mm,
we want to like be salt and light through what
mm,
we do, and not because like we're a Christian company, but through the excellence and the way we interact with people and treat
yes.
people. We want them to be interested and curious about like what is Christianity, who
Yeah.
is Jesus, so
Yes.
yeah, when I heard that, it just like gave me goosebumps,
Wow.
and so yeah, those are the things that I live for.
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing. I love that. That is just, like you said, it's just like, yep, that's what it's all about. you know,
Yeah.
that's amazing. That's just so encouraging. So for our listeners, and obviously quite a bit about Overflow Worship because we've been a client of Marketing with
Yeah.
Wisdom, and it's been just so amazing and such a blessing to our organization. But a lot of the people that we work with and the churches that we work with are that small to medium size. And so I was curious if you had a couple of tips to maybe share with whether it's, the leadership or a church organization as a whole, for people who maybe they're overwhelmed by the idea of marketing, or
Mm.
just kind of they've never done any of it before. They don't have social media, they don't have a website, or they don't have much of a website. Are there a couple things that you would encourage them to do first? I don't know if that's the right way
Yeah.
to phrase that question, but I'll start there.
Yeah, and I think what I've read is 95% of churches in America are 500 or less people.
Yes.
So that's most of the churches,
Yes.
in the country. And yeah, I mean, a lot of the churches lack resources or the expertise to really get the word out. And one of our clients told me yesterday on a call that, that we've been really instrumental in amplifying what they do, and like getting the word out. And they're a church. They're actually a really large church, but
Mm,
they've had challenges in like getting the word out about the things that they're creating, that the resources that they provide. So I think one of the first things I would do if I was a church is have a video on your website.
mm,
So, there's a lot of, great tools nowadays where you can, build a website yourself. If you have, very little budget, there's websites like Squarespace or Wix, that have templates. And really, that's a great way to start, get
mhm,
started and at least have your presence out there.
mhm,
And through your content on your website, It will help with Google rankings, which is considered search engine
Mm-hmm.
optimization, SEO. So when you have a website, at least like you're gonna get discovered, and so you want to add written content on your website, but you also want to have a quick like welcome video.
Okay.
Um, I think for visitors that have never heard about you, or don't know anything about your church, the best way to get to know you without them having to step foot in your building is for you to create a video, sharing with them what the purpose of your church is, what you're passionate about as a church,
Mm-hmm.
and what that person can expect, when they come to your church. So
Yeah.
I would say like a quick 60-second video. It doesn't even have to be like a professional,
Okay.
produced video. It can be just on an iPhone with like good light. Like lighting can make all the difference in the world. So,
Yeah, for sure.
just have like good lighting, and have an iPhone and do a quick 60-second video as the senior pastor saying, "Hey, we want you to come visit us this Sunday, and this is what you can expect, and this is our vision, as a church." So that would be one thing I think that any church can do.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is knowing, what social media platforms your people are using.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be even a quick like word of mouth survey, or just a quick survey online that your church people can fill out and figure out like what's the number one platform that they're on, and focus on sharing content and adding value through that platform on a
Mm-hmm.
weekly basis.
Okay.
And I would guess that for most listeners, it will be Facebook right now.
Yeah.
And you can, post like share announcements, share, things that maybe that you aren't able to share on a Sunday morning because of time constraints. Um, and one tip with, any kind of social media post is to really look at it from a brand new visitor's perspective.
Mm.
So don't tailor everything to your church members, that are like deep
Sure.
into, your community. So for as a bad example, I one time I visited a church website because I was, we were looking for a church, and it was during winter here in Kansas City. And the first post I saw on their Facebook was the pastor pleading for people to come help shovel the snow on
Oh.
Saturday because he was going to be out of town.
Oh.
And immediately I'm like, well, that just comes across like they don't have their stuff together,
Yeah, sure.
So you want to make sure that like whatever you're posting, you're proud of anybody to see, not
Yeah.
just your church community.
Yeah.
And for your church community, you can create a private Facebook group, that
Yeah.
they can be a part of and know about the needs of the church. So that would be, one thing I would say, posting like at least, twice a week would be a good start. Maybe one is your sermon, like link to your sermon audio or video with some notes. One can be just an encouraging message, or you could even make it interactive and fun and do polls and ask for people's feedback on something.
Mhm.
Really, like social media is not just this megaphone that you use to just promote the heck
Yeah.
out of whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
You want to use it as a platform to engage with your people, to make them feel connected during the week. So
Yeah.
those would be two things that I would start with.
Yeah. That's great. And I think sometimes even for me, social media feels like a monster, and
Yeah.
you probably heard me say that and I think I'm gonna go crazy, you know. But that's such a great way to just like simplify and start with, something really manageable, but
Mhm.
also to it's like when we shift that perspective and view it through the lens of, how can this continue to just augment the ministry that we're doing and really encourage our community and let people know who we are rather than, like you said, this giant megaphone or just, I
Yeah.
think sometimes for a while, I felt like I don't even know what to say, even with my, like,
Yeah.
why, I don't know, why am I even posting anything? But it gives like a reason, behind that. And I think that's so great for churches and anybody really to kind of shift that perspective because it puts vision behind
Yeah.
everything that, you're saying. I love that. So, Wisdom, if somebody wanted to get in touch with you guys at Marketing with Wisdom, how can they do that?
Yeah, you can go to marketingwithwisdom.com, and we have a contact form, and you would just fill that out, and we will get in touch with you. And we offer like an initial call that's free of charge, so you can easily fill that out and chat with us, and we can go over like your needs and what you're looking for and how we can help you.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Wisdom. This was such a fun conversation and just encouraging for me too, even to hear, your story and what God's been bringing you and your family through. So thank you so much for joining the
Thank you.
podcast
Thank you
today.
for having me.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Well, here's the end of another episode of the Overflow Worship Podcast. Hope that you all have a great rest of your week.
Thank you for listening to the Overflow Worship Podcast. To stay up to date, please subscribe for the latest episodes and information. To learn more about the ministry of Overflow, visit overflowworship.com. If you have questions or prayer requests, we would love to hear from you. You can reach us at info@overflowworship.com.